Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, including theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, you've been doing a lot of media lately. Are you tired of talking into a microphone yet?
I've been tired since before we started the podcast.
And I suppose the pre-show stuff and you hurting my brain is well, wait, that sounded more enjoyable for you, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
I don't know what you're talking about. That was excruciating for me.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure.
Work. Yeah, no, it was tough.
Yeah. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We have a game to review. We didn't preview the last one because it's the first preseason game, and why do you preview that? But we have a review of the game. We'll be getting into that in just a moment. The Vikings lost to the Raiders, but there were a lot of interesting points to discuss and a lot of things we can break down. Also, we have a game to preview against the 49ers here that will be happening on Saturday, along with some discussion on some cuts and, of course, the mailbag. But before we start, once again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. Couple of pieces of house cleaning before we start. First things first, the fantasy football lottery is indeed open. If you are interested in joining the Hell League, if you are interested in joining just the regular league, send a DM on Twitter to norsecodepodcast or email norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, and I will take care of that. I will get you into the lottery. It is more than 100 strong. It is fantastic, and you people should join the greatest experience one can have in fantasy.
If you want to join the Hell League, James can make that happen, but James cannot help you.
No.
You need a different kind of help.
Yeah, I am merely here to get you into the Hell League. It's all, you're on your own once you get there. It's you and I still need to go through and pare down some rules, but yeah, it's an experience if nothing else.
We could do that partway through the season.
Well, it's not like we didn't.
Deadline here.
It's not like we didn't before. Also, just a reminder that over on Patreon, if you sign up for the year subscription, you are entered into the drawing for the Treadwell framed and signed jersey that is conveniently hiding behind the chair in my room. Which is nice because now that I have positioned it like this, Roger Goodell's eyes aren't burning like into my soul.
Yeah, but it also means you don't know where he is.
That is accurate, actually. He might have jumped out of the picture by now. So if you are interested in such a thing, it's $37.81 a year compared to the $42 that you'd be spending a year just doing it month to month. So, but the only way to get access to the drawing for this is to go over to patreon.com/norsecode and choose the year-long subscription. Speaking of which, just a couple people to quick thank. We want to thank Professor Poop for upgrading his membership to the yearly. Thank you so much. Also, Max and Jeff Swoboda. Thank you guys so much for signing up over on Patreon. You guys are great. Patreon people get bonus episodes. They get access to the Discord, which was definitely very popular during game day. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Arif posted a wonderful picture of the sarcasm that is just dripping from that channel. So check that out. It's a heck of a lot of fun, and Dusty and I and Arif really enjoy it. So go over to patreon.com/norsecode. You can also go to paypal.me/norsecode as well if you'd like to make just a one-time donation. You can also go over to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up an Arif shower curtain, or shirt and cup and mug and everything else, but really the shower curtain's where it's at. Finally, last bit of news before we break into the actual review, we have a live show to announce. We are going to be in London for the game against the Saints, and instead of doing it on the Thursday before, we're actually going to be doing it after the game. So we are going to be doing it over at a pub called Antwerp Arms on Sunday, October 2nd, after the game. So again, we'll be doing this October 2nd. Antwerp Arms is the name of the pub. The show notes will have a link to the location of it. It is in North London. It's awesome. It looks great. Everything I have everything I've heard from our fixer over there and from talking with people involved in the pub, it should be a good time. So check us out if you happen to be in the UK and want to have a live Norse Code experience. If you'd like to see Nessie in person and don't want to drive up to Scotland, you can head over to Antwerp Arms on October 2nd. So check that out. That should be a heck of a lot of fun. All right, so all of that is done. Let's the pre-show stuff lasted like 15 minutes last episode. I'm sorry. We had a lot of things to talk. We had a lot of things to talk about. You had a new show to plug, and I hadn't had an opportunity to discuss how great the fantasy league is. So we're doing better this time around. So let's talk about training camp. It's been 2 weeks since we talked. A lot of things have happened. A lot of people have kind of had their stock rise and fall a bit. Without getting into too much as far as the game is concerned, what's happened in training camp over the past 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, with the Pats coming on, I think we were able to get a better sense of what that offensive line and defensive line was going to look like. We got our first look at kind of what the pseudo 3-4 kind of nickel 2-4 defense is going to look like, with full contact or relatively full contact. And I think that there's some stuff that, coming away from it, there's reasons to build confidence for both the offensive and defensive lines, which is like a difficult kind of tightrope to walk when you're talking about who looks good in training camp because they're competing against each other. But I think that at least as far as the starters go, there's a lot of reasons for optimism there. I think that the cornerback group looks a little bit better over the past week and a half. I really like the receiver depth, although I'm not sure that was ever going to be a huge problem. And I like how the offense just kind of generally looks. I mean, it's the preseason. Everybody gets to be optimistic, even me. And so nothing but good things to say about training camp, unless we're talking about quarterbacks.
Boy, that's a fun caveat.
So, Kirk's looked actually really good. I just like throwing that in there.
So, obviously Kirk Cousins ended up testing positive for COVID, so he didn't end up playing in the game on this last Sunday. But so that ended up kind of giving us an idea of what the depth at quarterback actually looks like. As far as training camp went, how did I want to talk about two groups specifically here. How did the quarterbacks look, and how did the corners look trying to cover this?
Well, no, I mean, Cousins has looked pretty good, and obviously, the receivers that he's got available to him look fantastic. But in terms of what the defensive backs look like when Cousins is out there, Patrick Peterson, I think, in a system that takes them kind of off the line of scrimmage a little bit more often. I don't know if rejuvenated or revitalized is the correct word, but looks like a better player than he was last year. And last year, I mean, he was perfectly fine, which was, a really rarity for the Vikings secondary. I thought that, the way that Peterson has played has generally looked good. I think that Cameron Dancer, Cameron Bynum, Harrison Smith, they all are doing things that I think just generally tells us that secondary is going to be kind of an improved looking unit. So, for the most part, I think that, there's some positives there. I think when you get to the second and third teams on both sides of the ball, that's when you kind of begin to get a little bit worried. And obviously, they're backups for a reason. They're just not going to be as talented as the starters. And so saying that the backups look worse than the starters is not itself news, but rather I wanted to say that the backups are guys that we expect to eventually ascend into starters don't look as good at those two positions you identified as you typically expect backups to be, especially I think at quarterback. We'll talk about, how that looked in the preseason game, but in camp, the quarterback situation has been, I would say, relatively dire. I don't really like what that position is producing. And I think that you're not going to get like a reasonable quality backup. And by that, I mean someone like a Chase Daniel, right? Not anyone's going to light the world on fire unless it's against the Vikings, I guess, or Matt Moore, right? Not anybody at that level, but rather kind of below that level. And that's the worry, is that, if you're up 14 and Kirk Cousins goes down at halftime and you got to trot out Kellen Mond or Sean Mannion out there and they have to preserve a 14-point lead to win the game for 30 minutes. That's not someone you're going to be comfortable in being able to do that for you. Whereas with like a Chase Daniel, yeah, absolutely, you could blow 7 whole points, you'd be fine.
All you really need is like a fine backup like a Drew Lock.
Well, I mean, he and Kirk Cousins have a couple of things in common now, right?
Well, I mean, Drew Lock has caught COVID 3 times, so he's still beating Kirk by one, but the season's not over by a long shot.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the competitive spirit is what Kirk is known for. He'll be diligent. He'll try to catch it again.
There you go. So as far as other training camp news, the story this today anyway is the fact that they made their cuts. The 5 cuts that had to be made for bringing down the roster number. So let's talk a little bit about that and I say a little goodbye to each of them, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. We'll start with the injured players because they were cut primarily because they were injured. Obviously, there's other players where you could probably cut them and say it was for injury related reasons. And these players were kind of already at the bottom of the roster, but might as well highlight them. Tyrese Stevenson, defensive lineman, maybe more of a nose tackle than a defensive end. Chris Thomason reported that he had a shoulder or AC joint injury that might take him out for 4 weeks, at which point the Vikings might just release him outright. If he and his agent believe that he'll heal faster than that, he might seek an injury settlement that will get him released sooner than that. Thomas Hennigan, wide receiver, we saw, I think, him very briefly in the Vikings game. It sounded like he actually got hurt in that game. And again, Chris Thomason reports that he sustained a shoulder injury as well. This one sounds like it's a season-ending one based off of the tweet I read. Hopefully for his sake, that's not the case. Although, given the nature of how his contract is structured, the hope would be that he still gets paid a decent amount. I think for lower end players on IR, it's not. It's like 20% of the contract for some of these guys. It's not great. The players that were not waived for injury related reasons, which if they go through waivers, which they're almost certainly going to, these 2 players get flipped to injury reserve. Now, waived players include Andre Mintz, outside linebacker, who I've been talking up a little bit in camp. I thought he looked pretty good. Hopefully he'll catch on somewhere because I think that he's got some fundamental talent as a backup edge rusher. Jake Vargas, fullback. It's a position I don't think the Vikings will spend too much time investing in. Now, the Vikings in previous regimes, like the Zimmer regime, would keep that fullback through the first round of cuts so that he could be on the practice squad later. So I guess this is telling us something about the priorities. And then Ty Smith, cornerback, was cut. He's a veteran. You can't waive him. He just gets cut, and he immediately becomes a free agent as opposed to going through the waiver process. Struggled a bit in camp. I think that he was probably not the worst corner in camp or anything like that, but because he's a veteran that carries veteran minimum, and you might want to kind of bank on upside a little bit more, he kind of got moved to the front of the line in terms of cuts.
Well, let's talk about the game, because this is obviously the bigger thing on people's minds. We actually had football to watch instead of just hearing about it online or reading about it on Twitter. So the game happened on Sunday. It started with a wonderful return and then immediately got called back because of a penalty. And penalties appeared to be a big part of a good portion of the game.
Yeah, there's a decent amount of penalties, not as much as the Dallas Cowboys apparently had. I believe they sustained like 13 penalties in their game. The Vikings did not quite do that, but we did see a fair amount of penalties on offense, defense, and special teams. I think we saw Josh Metellus with the special teams penalty. We saw, was it Josh Metellus who had that opening kickoff penalty? I don't remember now. We saw a couple of penalties from Andrew Booth on the same play. There's a face mask and a pass interference. We saw a couple of other penalties, a false start from.
That wasn't actually a pass. That wasn't even a pass interference penalty that he had got. He got the illegal contact.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
there was a lot of illegal contact being called, which
which is an emphasis that the NFL announced that they would have. Which is I don't know about that. I don't know if I like that. But on the broadcast, it was either that broadcast or the Eagles Jets broadcast. They mentioned that they might actually be a little bit less aggressive about calling the unintentional defender running into a quarterback after a play penalties. Which, if that's the case, that rules. So hopefully that's true. But yeah. So they got by that penalty. The false start for Blake Brandel. I think there was another false start on the offensive line. Was it Ole Udoh maybe? Yeah, I mean, it was a penalty ridden affair, a little bit more undisciplined than I think we're typically used to seeing from the Vikings outside of the cornerback group. Which hopefully they clean that up.
So Sean Mannion is the first quarterback out, which is not a sentence that inspires a lot of confidence. Uh, how do you feel that he did against the Raiders?
Um, I don't think it was as bad as like his PFF grade or his worst detractor said. But it wasn't good.
They were blitzing the hell out of him, which was a bit of a
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah, and his pocket was collapsing a little bit more. That was kind of the bigger concern from Oliuta than the penalties, is that the right side of the line would collapse a little bit too easily. But yeah, we saw, there's a lot more blitzing for sure than you typically see in a preseason game, although that has increased over time. Like these past 10 years, like it used to be never blitzed in the preseason, and now coaches are doing it all the time, which I prefer. It gets you ready a little bit easier. But yeah, he was also holding onto the ball a little bit, inviting pressure a little bit. I don't think it was, in terms of that, it was as bad as Mond, but it's certainly a problem that he has. And we saw kind of the limits of his style of play. We saw him kind of miss an easy pass early to start. We saw him not be 100% accurate or push the ball with a great arm. But for the most part, I thought he's making the right reads, is going to the right guys. So it was an okay performance. You didn't end with I don't think he got a single touchdown, right? That the passing touchdowns are all from Kellen Mond.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was the kind of performance that, had I not seen his training camp, I would have just said, yeah, that's all right. You could have him as a backup. Now I've seen him play and I've seen training camp, so I know that that's not the case. But honestly, the preseason performance wasn't as bad from him as I think a lot of people said for him.
So let's also talk about Kellen Mond just while we're on the topic of quarterbacks. How do you feel Kellen Mond did, and did he do enough to secure the number 2 quarterback position, or is he still looking? Is he still looking at number 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the perspective of the Vikings, they're going to keep rotating them. But I think if we were to make a decision now, we'd say that Kellen Mond is probably the number 2 quarterback. And I say probably, I want to soft roll it a little bit. Mond has been struggling a lot in camp. The last couple of practices, he looked like the better of the 2 quarterbacks. But for the majority of training camp, Mannion looked like the better quarterback. So I wanted to put out there that, the balance of evaluation we have is not necessarily very one-sided in favor of Mond. And then obviously, statistically in this game, Mond was a substantially better quarterback than Mannion. And in terms of finding highlights to look at, yeah, I mean his best throws were way better than Sean Mannion's best throws. The thing is, and he wasn't punished very much for it in the box score, the way Mond plays translates less into the way quarterbacks tend to win in the NFL, or at least tend to do okay in the NFL. And that's because even more than Mannion, Mond was holding onto the ball really long. Actually, I'm going to take a look right now on PFF because they've got the time and pocket stats. I'm going to see if I'm an idiot for believing that. So let's see who held on to the ball the longest. Okay, so Malik Willis, that makes a lot of sense. Then Bryce Perkins, then Kellen Mond. So Kellen Mond ranked 3rd of 64 quarterbacks in longest time to throw. So, okay, that matches my intuition a lot. Right next to him is Jake Browning. Hey, he's still kicking around. Good job, buddy. Mond only had 3 of his dropbacks, which he had 16 dropbacks. 3 of his 16 dropbacks occur in under 2.5 seconds, which in a non-play action offense is typically when you'd want to get rid of the ball if the ball is being aimed intermediate to short. Now, Mond did throw deep quite a bit. I think he had 4+ completions of 15+ yards, so that's not like a 100%, one-to-one tracking or anything like that. But it's worth noting. And especially kind of early on, he certainly wasn't in rhythm. So he's inviting a lot of pressure. And that offensive line happens to be doing actually a pretty decent job, especially Blake Brandel, Ed Ingram, Austin Schlottman. I think they're all doing a really good job. And relative to the competition they're up against, which is different than who the starters are up against. And so Mond was blessed with a little bit more protection for that time in the pocket. And I don't think that that's something that he can consistently count on going into the regular season. I don't think he can count on defensive backs dropping interceptions like that as often as they do. I think the rate for defensive backs catching those is something like 60%. So it's not very high, but I would still think like that first throw to Chisena was something that would be, potentially backbreaking for a team because it's normally a pick. He's missing open guys. I think, the second passing play that he had a slant route that was like, not a slant route, a dig route that was like wide open. It was in his progression. He was staring at the guy. And then I think it was BC Johnson. And then he just decides no, and he throws the dump off, which is really frustrating. Now, in the fourth quarter or late in the third quarter, I forget which, because I know Sean Mannion did come back for a little bit. He did get substantially more interesting as a passer. He was throwing deep. Those kind of straight down the field throws are a lot better for him than throws that have like some art in the route running, right? Where a receiver breaks at some point and you have to throw with anticipation to the break. That's not something he can do. But with a deep ball, you don't really have a break in the route, and so he can just throw it intuitively, and that typically actually goes very well for him. So obviously the high level stuff that we saw from him, just in terms of what his highlights were, absolutely phenomenal. But I think it's kind of hiding a set of traits and characteristics that just doesn't translate well into the NFL. And I think that if you were to play him right away, like let's say Kirk Cousins, his COVID extends all the way to week one, which was that like 4 weeks from now, that would be very alarming. If his COVID extends all the way to week one, that's ventilator type stuff. You got to look into that. But whatever reason Kirk Cousins isn't available week one, right? He has to, fundraise for a charity he's very committed to. I don't know. But who would you rather have in the game, Mond or Mannion? Personally, I'd say Mannion in that week one game. But I think, in terms of who I would rather roster in a two quarterback situation, I'd probably take Mond because of that upside that we saw. I just kind of want to say that the dip down in the level of play that we should see from Mond from the preseason to the regular season, I want to say that is still actually there's still a good likelihood that is in the cards. So I think Mond had some really great moments. I think overall he played in a way that was worrisome to me.
Well, let's talk about the rookies, specifically Ed Ingram. How did Ed Ingram end up looking out there?
Yeah, when I did my first kind of pass at the film review, I thought he looked really great. And wonder of wonders, when I was able to take a look at the All-22, he continued to look great. There weren't really any mistakes that he made that I was like particularly aware of. I think that PFF logged him with one pressure, which kind of it doesn't bother me. I thought that he did a really great job in the passing game. I thought his awareness was really good. I think that his ability to kind of stay square against different types of pass rushers was really good. In the run game, we saw him dent some guys. I kind of still want to see him on the move and reach block, a nose tackle on the other side of the center, or get to a far side linebacker or something like that. I'd like to see kind of what the extent of his athleticism is on these difficult blocks and see kind of what he can do. But what he was asked to do, he did, I think, really, really well. It was really encouraging. And again, he was against like third stringers, fourth stringers, whereas like, the first team offensive line was against kind of first teamers.
How about the rest of the rookies? How were they looking?
Lewis Cine, I thought was at average. He didn't really have a lot of contributions. Watching him in the All-22 was actually kind of boring because he wasn't tested too much in coverage. I think he gave up like one reception. It was not really a big deal. So we didn't get much out of him. Andrew Booth, I thought, kind of the up and down guy. His highlights are pretty good. I mean, if you take a look at it, this is really nice with the All-22 is that you get to watch the plays where he's not targeted. And it very much looks like the reason he's not targeted is because he's doing a pretty good job covering these people. But when he is targeted, he's making some pretty significant mistakes. I mean, we mentioned the double penalty on the same play earlier, but he also, gets burned a little bit every so often. So I don't think that he's necessarily ready yet. Brian Asamoah, super up and down. I'd put him kind of in the same category. Really does not do a great job of figuring out what his run angle should be on inside runs. But on outside runs, he looks to be fantastic. I mean, he had a really great highlight behind the line of scrimmage tackle on an outside run where he just kind of strung out the running back, and the running back just never had any room. So, good for him there. Caleb Evans, I just didn't pay as much attention to him as I'd like. So I didn't get to see a ton of him. Jalen Naylor, on special teams, not so great, but as a receiver was fine. I think he had a catch. I didn't pay as much attention for Darian Lowe. So For the most part, that's kind of the rookie report. I think that none of these guys are really, aside from maybe Ed Ingram, are probably where you necessarily want them to be at this point in the offseason, but neither is it, enormously alarming either way.
Yeah. Week 1 preseason, it's more about realizing, this is the speed at which the game is played. All right.
Exactly.
Wow, that guy just blew right by me. All right, I'm going to have to step up a bit. Let's talk about some more highlights here. Harrison Phillips.
Yeah, I thought he was the best player on the field for either team. I thought he looked fantastic. He was able to generate some pass rush pressure, which is usually not in his skill set. He was a really fantastic run defender. Even when he's not making the tackle, he does a great job kind of clogging things up so the running back doesn't have room to run and frees up the linebackers to do some stuff. And in the case for the Vikings, it freed up the safeties to do some stuff too. Really fantastic. I think he had 4 tackles that were at or near a loss, which was really great. As a nose tackle, you just don't really tend to rack up those kind of statistics. And then he was able to put some pressure on the quarterback. And then when he took a breather on the sideline, the Raiders immediately ripped off an 8-yard run followed by another good run. So it sounds like he's going to be pretty critical to the way that run defense is set up.
Well, let's talk about Ty Chandler and Wong Wu had a fun little 1-2 punch there for a little bit.
Yeah, Chandler, he averaged 10 yards a carry, I think, so on 5 carries, so 50 yards. He did run into some lighter boxes, so I guess PFF graded him higher and said he had forced more missed tackles. But I thought that of the two, I'd say Wong Wu was more impressive to me. But it kind of doesn't matter because both of them played extremely well. Wong Wu did a great job keeping his balance in some of these heavier tackles he was hitting. And obviously, the ball control stuff, you always kind of worry about that with a younger guy, especially a guy who does a lot of kickoff return. That's just kind of like a pattern you see sometimes. And he did a great job kind of keeping the ball secure. So the two of them were really phenomenal. I think Wong Wu averaged something like 7 yards a carry. They were really phenomenal in generating these big runs. Neither of them I trust at the goal line. The Vikings did try Wong with the goal line. That did not go well for him or the Vikings. But for the most part, I thought that both of them did a really phenomenal job. This is, I just got asked on a different podcast, hey, with how well Chandler and Wong Wu played, would the Vikings consider trading Alexander Madison? And my answer to that is no. If they did, he probably would have gotten more play in the preseason than he actually got. But also, he performs a different role in the offense. So, I really liked what I saw from the running backs. If I were to kind of rank them, I'd say Wong Wu over Chandler. But really, both of them had really, really great games they could take positives from.
It was a lot of fun to watch, especially Wong Wu just break through. But Chandler had a couple of real nice long runs.
Yeah, especially up the middle, which you're always kind of worried when it's one of those faster guys that goes in the late rounds. If he's a smaller, faster guy, there's no way he can run up the middle. But he got a couple of those.
Well, let's talk about next person up. Well, not really persons. Let's talk about the wide receiver depth. We have actual depth at this position.
Yeah, so we didn't get to see as much from BC Johnson as I think we would have liked. I don't think that he, necessarily availed himself well, but also he should have been targeted on some plays that he wasn't targeted. So give him that. But after that, we saw a really great highlight from Myra Mitchell as well as another target and catch from him. We saw a really good set of plays from Dan Chisna, of all people, who I don't even think is going to make the roster, but it was just hey man, you ran a route. And you got open. That fantastic. We're working with bonus money now. I can't believe you did it. But we saw Christian Jackson have, I think, 3 targets or something like that. He did a pretty great job. He won a pretty difficult catch. Amir Smith-Marset, of course, got targeted 5 times, got 3 receptions. I would say neither of the incompletions were his fault. One person, after I said that, one person was like, "Are you sure that first one's not his fault?" And I'd say this is kind of one of those situations where if you're a wide receiver coach, you blame the wide receiver. If you're a quarterback coach, you blame the quarterback. Because in both of those instances, your job is to make that guy better at football. And if he kind of takes accountability for it, that makes sense. But I think it is more reasonable to expect more from the quarterback, from an average quarterback, to make that throw better than from an average receiver to take that throw and do something with it. So I don't want to knock him too bad for either of those, quote unquote drops. And the other one was really high. So I thought he did a great job. He got open. He's been modulating his speed and route running, which is not something that he's been known to do. We didn't see a ton of him last year, but he didn't do that much. And so seeing him kind of develop a more complete skill set as a receiver was really nice. And of course, you've also got, Jalen Naylor, Albert Wilson got 2 touchdowns. So whoever the Vikings do end up rolling with, whether they get 5 receivers, 6 receivers, I think that they'll be pretty happy with the receivers they end up rostering.
One person I wanted to make sure to mention just before we move on was T.Y. McGill, who ended up getting 2 sacks.
Yeah. He's been a guy that I've been, promoting as somebody who's been having a really good Vikings camp for a backup. And he showed up in this game. It's interesting because he created, I think, a fair amount of pressure. One of those sacks, I think, was more created by, I want to say, Patrick Jones Jonathan Bullard, actually. So, I wouldn't give him full credit for the sack, but I would give him credit for another sack that he had helped cause. So, from a pass rush perspective, I thought that we saw a lot from him. He's more of a nose tackle. And I think that after kind of seeing TJ Smith, after seeing, some of these other players attempt to man the backup nose position when Harrison Phillips is out, seeing them get kind of moved around or not get the right leverage, but then seeing T.Y. McGill go in there and making sure that he's always got kind of a gap accounted for, if not 2 gaps accounted for, that was really nice to see. That's going to be more his job than the pass rushing. The sacks are probably not going to come from him all that often. It was nice that he got 2. But overall, I mean, I thought he had a really phenomenal game, and I think that, there's probably a roster spot waiting for him at this point, unless he kind of screws up the next 2 weeks.
Yeah. So he looked great. Let's talk about some lowlights then. Let's start with Jesse Davis.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Ed Ingram and highlights. It just so happens that the person Ed Ingram is competing with, Jesse Davis, had one of the worst, I think, performances of anybody on the Vikings. Which, that's not a great kind of award to win. I don't know that there's, there were so many catastrophic performances from the Vikings in this game that it was tough. But I think that, giving up, I want to say he gave up 2 or 3 pressures. I know PFF only said 1, but I think that, his lack of awareness on one of the blitzes led to 1 sack. I think he got walked into another one, or not into another sack, but walked into a pressure. Overall, I mean, he just made a number of mistakes that when I tweeted out that Jesse Davis was having trouble, a bunch of Dolphins fans responded to the tweet like, "We told you," or "Get used to it." So, it's one of those things with the fan. It's like when Matt Khalil was having trouble in Carolina, and a Carolina Panthers beat writer would say, "Yeah, I mean, so-and-so, Julius Peppers in one-on-ones beat Matt Khalil, or Cameron Jordan in an actual game beat Matt Khalil for the sack." And Vikings fans would just flood that guy's mentions and just be like, "Yeah, well, that's what you get. You got Matt Khalil." That's kind of how I felt with Jesse Davis, and I don't really understand where all this frustration comes from, because it's not like he was ever a savior. He just kind of had to show up. And the Dolphins are like, "Yeah, our offensive line's incomplete, so you're starting again." But every team culture ends up with players they end up hating. So I guess that was Jesse Davis. And in this case, Dolphins fans felt vindicated after seeing how poorly he did. A lot of communication errors, a lot of technique errors. It just kind of wasn't there for him. So at this point, I'd say Ingram's almost certainly ahead of him in the race to start.
Well, let's also talk about Chaz Surratt and Troy Dye.
Yeah, pretty bad days for both of them. I think when it comes to backup linebacker, the Vikings are only going to keep 2, and I think that those 2 are probably going to be Blake Lynch and Brian Asamoah. Chaz Surratt still just looks like a linebacker that has only recently learned the position, which is a true thing about him as well. It's very convenient that his actual path matches the type of play that he has. And he's a quarterback, right? And he's playing linebacker, and it's not very pretty. He's missing tackles. He's not breaking down. He knows where he needs to be, which, for a linebacker, if you're a super athlete and you know where you need to be, that's like 80% of the battle. But it's just that other 20% is just not there for him. Troy Dye certainly is not unfamiliar with the concept of playing linebacker in the way that Chaz Surratt is. But just seems constantly under leveraged and out of position. It's not that he doesn't have the athleticism to do a lot of the things the Vikings ask of him, but it's rather that he keeps on putting himself in situations, he's late to react to play action, for example. He keeps on putting himself in situations where he's half a step or 1 step away of where he needs to be, and that creates a running lane or a passing lane. We saw he had 5 tackles in the game, and I looked up how many of them were run defense tackles, and it was 1. So you had 4 coverage related tackles. It's okay, you're leading the team in tackles, but that's only because you're giving up these receptions, and the receptions that he gave up were pretty bad. Although I will say that like the wheel route or the drag route, I should say not the wheel route, the drag route run underneath him. I mean, there's not a lot of linebackers in that coverage that could be able to do that. So I don't want to hurt him too bad, but it's a concern.
Well, let's also talk about Josh Metellus as well.
Yeah, Metellus, if you only take a look at how he did on defense, it was fine. I think PFF even said he was good. I don't know if I go that far, but he was involved in the running game. He had a bunch of stops near the line of scrimmage. He, didn't allow much in coverage, but that's not going to be his job in the NFL. His job is going to be to play on special teams. And he was disappointing on special teams. He had at least one penalty there. I think he missed out in a lane and another coverage assignment. And so, he was the Vikings' best special teamer last year. And with a new staff in place, their familiarity with him and his reputation as a good special teamer, that evaporates, right? And he has to make itself apparent all over again. And this is not the game for him to do that. So, as a defender, fine. I thought he was actually better than I would have expected. But as a special teams player, I thought that was a disappointment.
Yeah, this was kind of an odd game, and obviously we're not covering we're not covering like individual scoring plays or anything. Preseason games are more about individual performance and if the team is coming together, but not this drive looked really nice or whatever. But we had a couple of interesting plays from Kellen Mond. Patrick Jones was was notable, but not really good or bad.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you take a look at the statistics that, PFF puts out, like 4 pressures or something like that, leads the team in pressures. Also gave up enormous running lanes, not just the one that I think was notable on the broadcast with, I think, Jarrett Stidham, but also, on a number of other plays, he gets washed out of the play. Right. And so he ends up with a very because his good plays were very good and he created some sacks on the pressures that he was involved in. That I think is something that you can work with. It looked better than, DJ Wanham does generally, right? It looked better than, the other edge rushers from that perspective. But that's not it. Like, that's not all, right? And we know that there's going to be tackles in the league that are just going to do a great job locking him down. So he's got to be able to, contribute in some way, whether that is in coverage or defending the run or whatnot, right? And, it's not fully there for him. As a run defender, I think that that upside is certainly worth considering, but it just kind of there's a huge hole in his game that makes it difficult to give him full credit for the 4 pressures he generated.
Well, we can also talk just a little bit about Armon Watts as well.
Yeah, I'm excited about him as a player. I think that he's had a pretty decent camp. And in this game, he showed a little bit of pass rush capability, which is his overall his calling card, but man, he got pushed around a lot, right? Like he was able to generate pressure when the offensive line were moving backwards, but when they were moving forwards, he just didn't have a good base or an anchor to work off of. And very often we saw offensive linemen get off of double teams against him really quickly and get up to the second level, which of course creates a liability for the linebackers. So, some really, really good plays that the Vikings could use. But it's right now the way that he's playing, at least in the preseason. I think in the training camp environment he was better, but in the preseason, the way that he's playing right now is you kind of treat him as a designated pass rusher on third downs, so he doesn't get exposed too much as a run defender.
This game had a couple of weird aspects to it. The first thing though was the fact that the field looked like hell. And,
oh my God!
Just looking at it is like it reminded you initially. If you didn't hear Paul Allen talk about it, it reminded you initially of when they were in Oakland and they were sharing the field with the baseball team, and it turned out that the reason why it looked like that also had to do with the fact that they were sharing the field.
Yeah, Paul Allen mentioned that actually a couple of times that field had been used by the local soccer team. And that, for whatever reason, I know that soccer cleats tend to be longer than football cleats, plus you've got the toe. But for whatever reason, they liked it to be a little bit of a wetter surface. And I guess they overwatered it or something, or they didn't sufficiently dry it out after usage, which that stadium is kind of cool in that you can roll out the field.
It's like Arizona Stadium, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like Arizona, with a desert even. And I guess they didn't do that, or it didn't accomplish the goals. So it just got too moist. And so fungus. We got fungal infections, and so there's like these divots all over the field. It looked awful.
I was going to say, of all the times to have problems with the field and not be able to dry it out, considering all the news that have been coming out of Las Vegas about the monsoon season and rain and water rushing into hotels and everything, I suppose it would have been a little bit difficult at that particular moment to be able to dry it out. So, odd week for that.
Fair enough.
Other than there was one play that the Vikings had on special teams that really annoyed me, and I suppose this is like my last note of the game. There was a punt that went over the receiver's head, and he proceeded to attempt to catch it Willie Mays style, basket catch from behind, and then seemed confused when he got lit up by the gunner.
I think that was Amir Smith-Marset, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the game was full of like little mistakes that you'd expect in the first week of preseason. But when I saw that, my first thought was from Major League is great catch. No, never do that again. What?
Right, exactly.
Terrible idea. Anything else we should put out just to kind of put a bow on the Raiders' loss?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, despite the fact that it was a loss, I think there were just kind of a lot of positives from it. I'm really excited about what that defensive line is going to look like.
All right, so before we get to the mailbag, we do have a 49ers game to preview. Obviously, this is going to be the Week 2 preseason game. We're going to get more time for starters. Are we going to see Kirk Cousins?
I think so. I know that McVay with the Rams didn't ever play the starters, didn't ever play Goff or Stafford, if I remember correctly. But I that's not a truism across the league. I mean, when O'Connell was with Washington, he played. So I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to say it's limited. But we're not going to know for sure. O'Connell's been very secretive about when you ask him, he's just like, yeah, I don't know, we'll see.
He will be in the building for sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
All right.
That's what I was asking.
So the Vikings are going to be playing the 49ers. This is going to be in Minneapolis. One of your favorite quarterbacks in the league is going to be playing likely a couple of snaps anyway for the 49ers.
No, the 49ers aren't going to play Jimmy Garoppolo at all.
Oh, that's...
Right. It's because, he's staying healthy for trade bait.
That's right. He's getting, I love signing into Twitter in the morning and seeing the new I drew Jimmy G tweet every day. I've been retweeting
Rita
that.
Oaks? What's that Twitter account?
They're so good. Yeah, I believe that's the one.
It's so funny.
Every day there is a person on Twitter who ends up posting a wonderful drawing, and sometimes lately they've been going on to cups and things. Rita Oak Rita Oak _art is the one who posts all these Jimmy G. Every day it's like, I will draw Jimmy G until he's traded, and they're all pretty good. Some of them lately have been really great. I'm not going to be happy when he finally ends up getting traded and she has to find something else to do, but the Jimmy G art is pretty good. So
yeah,
Trey Lance is going to be making an appearance in the Upper Midwest once again. He is a former...
we talked a little bit about Kendall Hinton, position players playing quarterback. So kind of cool to see it in the preseason, getting ready for...
It's different, to be sure. So 49ers are coming to town. Blanket statement, what do you think we should expect as far as Vikings players going against this 49ers team?
Well, I would imagine that Vikings defenders interceptions galore, right? That's kind of the expectation. But when the Vikings have gone up against Taysom Hill or Chase Daniel or Matt Moore, they haven't been remarkable defenders in the past. But new coaching regime, when you go up against a bad quarterback, maybe they'll actually do something about it. Certainly that's
the reports on Trey Lance this offseason have been some really glowing and some Carson Wentz-esque.
Yeah, imagine that. Who else got that? Carson Wentz.
Carson Wentz was making Carson Wentz-esque throws?
Indeed. So, some of the reviews were glowing, and the other reviews were, hey, this is Carson Wentz. Let's not get out of our britches here.
As a side note, Drew McGarry is doing his Why Your Team Sucks series. And today it was the Washington Commanders. And
Oh yeah,
his
David Gary
comment
followed me for the first time today. I'm so happy.
his comment on Carson Wentz said, "Your quarterback outlet mall Brett Favre."
Fantastic.
Yeah. So the 49ers come to town. Which are the position battles we should be looking at when we're watching the game?
Well, I mean, the 49ers do have like a good set of pass rushers and defensive linemen up front. So, if we want to get like a heat check on Ed Ingram, this would be a good time for it. And a heat check on Christian Darrisaw, who is being compared to Trent Williams, probably Hall of Famer Trent Williams. So, interesting. Also, we'll get to see Trent Williams. So I think that the offensive line, defensive line optimism that I kind of put out there based off of the Raiders game and based off of camp. Well, now you get to test it up against some pretty good offensive linemen in Mike McGlinchey and Trent Williams. I don't know if that interior is as strong as it has been in the past for the 49ers. But it's nice to kind of get a different set of players in front of that interior defensive line, because I've just been so high on what Harrison Phillips has been able to do, and Dalvin Tomlinson's looked really great too. But I kind of have concerns about Zadarius Smith. I don't think that he has played as well as his reputation would suggest, either in camp or in the very, very brief preseason, showing that we had of him. And I don't know if that's just because Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill are both extremely good, which is like an option that we've got on the table, or if Zadarius Smith kind of doesn't have his fastball anymore. And I think having him go up against Trent Williams, Mike McGlinchey, that's going to give us a little bit more insight into that. So I think that the position battles at the line of scrimmage are going to be really important to kind of keep track of. Just because, there are known quantities on the edges on the offensive line for the 49ers, as well as known quantities throughout for the 49ers at with Nick Bosa and Eric Armstead, and to some extent Javon Kinlaw. I think that he is overrated by 49ers fans and underrated by the rest of the league. He's kind of one of those players. But yeah, I mean, there's kind of Kerry Hyder, for example, I think is a really interesting kind of hybrid player. They grabbed Charles Omenihu from the Houston Texans. A couple of players that have like hybrid capability that could test both the tackle and the guard. So I'm really curious about that. But beyond that, I mean, we'll get to see that cornerback group against a pretty interesting and kind of unique receiving core, right? Because most receiving cores have multiple types of receivers that are huge threats. Here you've got Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, as well as Juwan Jennings and Danny Gray, who we saw like some pretty good stuff from in the preseason. But those two are the primary guys. And with Jimmy Garoppolo led offense, we're kind of yak receivers that were catching it short, doing running back stuff. Exciting things, but not something you see day to day, week to week across the league. And so we'll be able to kind of see how those players line up against Patrick Peterson, Cameron Dancer, Andrew Booth, and so on, which is kind of a nice, interesting challenge when you had intermediate deep receivers like Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen instead of kind of short yards after catch receivers. So kind of curious about that. I think that there's going to be kind of a lot of dynamism in the way that these practices are run. Unfortunately, they're also in the morning, which I've just gotten so used to the Vikings being like the last practice in the NFL. Like everyone does their practice in the morning and the Vikings just decide to do it at like 2 p.m. Great. Fantastic. Love it. Now I got to wake up. So I don't love that.
Maybe they're trying to do that just to mess with with San Fran since they're coming in. They're doing shared practices this week, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think that's why, is not to mess with San Fran. I think to accomplish.
You heard it here first from the only person covering the Vikings beat for The Athletic. The Vikings are screwing with the 49ers right now.
No, I think they're doing it because the 49ers are used to earlier practices. So I think it's accommodating them. But yeah, I'm pretty curious about some of these position battles as they line up against kind of the unique options that the 49ers have to offer, plus the safety they have at quarterback.
You couldn't leave well enough alone there, could you?
Why not? Why should I?
I suppose.
He's the one who sucks.
I feel like this is a mirror of every conversation we had about 2 weeks ago. All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's get into the mailbag. We got plenty of stuff to talk about here. A lot of Viking stuff in the mailbag this week. So let's get into it. Sports Boy writes in, I know it's an incredibly premature question, but have you noticed any significant changes in play calling in the brief period of time we've seen the new regime in action?
I mean, they didn't run the ball on 2nd and long, right? So I guess there's that. So hooray. Beyond that, I mean, not like in terms of like run past different. I mean, yes, they did throw the ball more, but more in terms of the way that they wanted to design. I thought they had some really excellently designed plays. Just generally speaking, like good play design principles. Like every player in the offense is occupying a role, right? Like somebody that's really worth following. Jesus. I don't know why I've had to drink so much more water during podcasts.
Someone who's really worth following, Jesus.
Oh no, we can't have that. My reputation.
your poor atheist soul. There's a sentence.
All right, one sec. I could have muted the mic and I didn't. That's on me. But it's not like you deserve more than
no,
that.
You know what? Listen, if I'm getting my ears abused during the new machine, it might as well happen on my show too.
Right. It's conditioning.
Yeah,
Is that how ears work?
Let's go with that. Yeah.
Right. One person really worth following, especially in the preseason, is JT O'Sullivan. He does the QB School. It's stuff that he does on YouTube. I'm like really happy that I discovered him back when his videos were getting like 2,000 views or something like that. I actually didn't originally want to tell too many people about him because I was like, hey, he was like a secret source. I could just steal from him. Nobody would know. But yeah,
that would be unethical.
And I am not that. Right?
It's cricket. Sorry, it's cricket weather in North Dakota at the moment.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, he's getting anywhere between now 10,000 to 50,000. His top videos get like 200,000 views. But the real meat and potato stuff is like in the Patreon, which I'm a subscriber to. Just generally speaking, I think it's a good thing if our listeners were Patreon subscribers, just kind of generally. Just kind of throw that out there.
Maybe but, if not for us, for the Patreon model specifically, they deserve they deserve their cut.
But no, I mean he had some good stuff. But the one thing that he had, so he's got a Kellen Mond preseason week 1 analysis that I thought was really good. That luckily it like lined up with what I already thought, so I don't feel like I'm stealing from him. And also, it means I'm right. So 2 good things at once there. But he also, I should watch the Trey Lance one. I didn't do that. He also, behind the paywall, had one on the Baker Mayfield Sam Darnold battle, and he keeps on harping about how much he really hates the Ben McAdoo play design because it doesn't really seem like he's having all of the different pieces. It doesn't seem like any play is a complete play. It's like a collection of routes, and there's no consideration for how the routes interact with each other. Deontay Lee tweeted out a clip from the Patreon episode, which I'm sure JT O'Sullivan's fine with. It's like a 1-minute clip, where he talks about the post route that Baker Mayfield tries to throw. You do want post routes against quarters coverage, which is what happened here. Baker Mayfield identifies quarters coverage. He throws the post route. That's correct. Or I guess it's quarters, half. But the problem is no one is holding the other safety. There's no route that keeps that safety occupied. And because that safety is free. So that safety sees a guy going deep, and now he's running deep. And so now Mayfield throws the ball before, that becomes an issue. And by the time the ball is in the air, that other safety is now running. So now he's throwing into double coverage when it should never have been double coverage because there was no other route to hold that safety, to hold that second safety that would take that deep shot away. And because of that, this perfect route against this coverage, which should give you a wide open receiver if you're crossing the defensive back's face, which in this case, it turns out the receiver was, it would give you a touchdown, but it's not. And so that's a bad Ben McAdoo play design. And he harps about it over the course of the video a couple of times, which is really instructive, informative, even if like whether or not you want to hear someone dunk on a coach that doesn't already have like a very stellar reputation, as it turns out. It's really informative in terms of like how you might want to go about designing a play and what it means and stuff like that. So I encourage people to subscribe to his Patreon, watch all the videos, and then stay subscribed for the other videos. But for like $3 or whatever it is, it's not bad to get a crash course education quickly either. But he does have the Kellen Mond one up just on his YouTube channel without the Patreon paywall. And he talks about how much he likes the Vikings play designs. One of the elements is how these routes interact with each other, not just like rub routes or not just the what I'd indicated there, but how they play off of each other in terms of play sequencing and stuff like that. And we saw some really good stuff from the Vikings in terms of how they're creating openings for receivers, how they're having receivers follow zones that were vacated by a clear route, how they're having receivers, run these drag routes that turn into wheel routes if the play extends a little bit too long, how the scramble rules are organically written into the play rules and stuff like that. Like a receiver just kind of continues what he's doing in the natural flow of his route if it turns into a scramble situation. So, really good stuff. I encourage you to, well, I'll link it in the show notes. I've talked about it enough. I might as well. But I really do like the way that offense already seems to be progressing. And I will continue to steal content from JT O'Sullivan, who, I mean, people with, I'm not going to say older football fans because I'm not old, you're old. But, people who have been following football for a while will recognize the name JT O'Sullivan. I mean, he's been a backup quarterback for like a while. I believe he just quit his job as a high school coach to devote, and I think his like team like was really successful at State, to devote full time to this YouTube channel, which means it's supporting him, which is really fantastic news. It's so difficult as a creator to support yourself like that. So I'll link that in the show notes as well as to his Patreon because it's really excellent football content.
Well, let's go to a question from my favorite new Twitter handle, Brown's Massage Therapist Union.
I'm glad they're organized.
Yes, they are. They are definitely organizing. Do you have any explanation on why the 5-player cutdowns exist? Is it just to save the billionaires the weekly stipend tryout level players get during camp?
No, I think it's like an extension. Like, I mean, that's not even a rounding error for like billionaires, right? I think it's just kind of a relic of the way it used to work out. So, like before that, and the rest of the question kind of continues here. Before that, it was a 75-person roster. It was 90 to 75 to 53, and that, I think, made a degree of sense because it allowed coaches to begin focusing their coaching on guys they knew were candidates to make the roster. And, as soon as you kind of determine a guy's maybe not going to make the roster, it's probably better for, well, I mean, the paycheck's nice to have too, but it's probably better for everybody involved, paycheck aside, to kind of get on with it. And the coaches can give more individualized instruction, begin kind of deeper technique coaching, more one-on-one coaching, and begin developing game plans around guys that they think, might be relevant. And then also, the bubble players. I mean, the bubble players are like 12 to 20 players, right? I mean, a good 40 odd players on the roster are already set, right? Aside from kind of, the dark horse candidate that gets cut, every year that's kind of surprising. For the most part, those 40 players are predictable. It's kind of the rest of those players that you have to figure out. And if you want to devote your time evaluating players in camp, it makes sense. When you've got 75 players, you get rid of kind of those bottom 15. Now, I think it's just kind of an extension of that as the union keeps on winning some concessions, and not all of them, some concessions to protect some of the players that don't have as big of contracts. And I think that for the most part, the NFLPA union is weaker. It's getting weaker over time. So I'm not going to say that they keep winning stuff, but one of the things that they've been able to win is like stuff like roster size and minimum salaries. And I think it's reflective of that, the size of the practice squad and stuff like that. But I think mostly it made sense from a team perspective to go from 90 to 75 to 53. And this is just kind of an extension of that.
Also from the Browns Massage Therapist Union, is Kellen Mond just Kyle Sloter light?
Light? I mean, he's better than Kyle Sloter. That's not fair. But I get what you're saying. From the perspective of a guy that produces in the preseason that may not have the chops to produce in the regular season, I think that there is something there. But with Kyle Sloter, it like at one point it just felt like the thing that he's bad at is a thing that is so systemic to who he is that is probably not going to get fixed. Whereas with Kellen Mond, it's just like, dude, you see it. Just trust yourself. Like you shouldn't have to, and this is a problem that O'Sullivan had with Mond, you shouldn't have to confirm that what you're seeing is true before you throw the ball, because in the NFL, you don't have that luxury. You're correct that this play, I mean, he wasn't correct all the time, I'll say that, but you're correct that the guy that you think is going to be open is open. So throw the ball right before you're correct, and make yourself correct. And so tempo is something that you, in theory, have the ability to fix. And there's a question kind of later on that deals with this, that I'll get to, but that is something that you might be able to, fix over time. Which with Kyle Sloter is just like, yeah, I don't really care what the play is or what my progressions are. And it's like, well, if you don't care, I can't work with that.
Yeah, that only takes you so far in the USFL, as it turns out.
Yeah, which like, let's talk about it. I'm going to take a look at the USFL stat.
Like, let me make a point using the PFF grades involving the USFL.
Okay, well, that's another point, by the way. PFF has USFL stats, and they are not available to the public. There's like 8 people that care about that, and I'm one of them. Why not?
You give it to the Case Cookus guy. Just give it to the Case Cookus guy.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be public. Just give it to me. Let me in. But okay. But Kyle Sloter wins all USFL quarterback, right? He's on the All-Star team at quarterback. He was second in the league in interceptions. Like, come on.
He went full Favre. You never go full Favre.
He had like 6.2 yards per attempt. You know, had more yards per attempt.
Is it Mr. Cookus?
Yeah, obviously it's Mr. Cookus, but it also is Paxton Lynch and Brian Scott and Clayton Thorson and Jordan Ta'amu. Like it's like
this is a Deadspin Remember Some Guys post.
It is, but it's specifically to insult one guy. So if the Remember Some Guys is an act of reverence, so I don't want to
sully
cross
their
the
good
streams
name.
right, exactly. But if you sort it by like say passer rating, which has an enormous number of flaws, but like Luis Perez was number 1, right? Remember him? Remember Some Guys? But number 2 was Case Cookus. Number 3 was Paxton Lynch. Number 4 is Clayton Thorson. One of the Birmingham Stallion quarterbacks that ended up throwing a bunch of passes was after that. Jordan Ta'amu was after that. Kyle Sloter comes in after them, right? Like, it's why the team didn't even win that many games. I don't understand why Kyle Sloter got all USFL offense. That doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, he got cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars before cutdown day by about 2 weeks. So
they saw him on the Hall of Fame game. That was enough for them.
Yep.
You know why they signed him? Can't sign Case Cookus with a broken leg.
It's true. God, that's genuinely sad, man. Like he would 100% be floating around it. I can't say he'd be on an NFL roster, but he'd certainly be floating around an NFL roster if it wasn't for that leg. That's so sad.
Yeah. Well, they probably would have won the championship too, but let's put that pain in our past.
They did, James, and no evidence that you can marshal against me tells me that the Philadelphia Stars lost the USFL championship. They 100% won. I need to find the merch.
Some
Philadelphia Stars 2022 USFL championship.
There's no merch. They didn't even. You couldn't even get a Case Cookus jersey. On
not with that attitude.
I looked. You actually couldn't get one off the website.
Are you kidding? He started for most of the year.
Yeah, you couldn't. It was ridiculous. I actually had complained at some point to their
Did you
social media
submit a
department.
complaint?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, the fact that we couldn't get media availability during that week annoyed me too, but like fine. But
Well,
like
that's not on them. That's on
that's on other people.
yeah.
But like you give the Case Cookus guy Case Cookus during Case Cookus week. That's just what you do.
Right.
Let's go to Surly Cooper, who asks, who is most likely to be involved in a joint practice altercation this week from both the 49ers and the Vikings?
Me and Kyle Sloter, it sounds like. No. I easily Brandon Ayuk and Andrew Booth. So Andrew Booth has been starting fights that other people have not picked up yet on his own team already. He's been so close to fights, so close so many times. And Brandon Ayuk has already fought his own team. I don't think this year, but has already fought his own. He got started a fight with a linebacker last year, I think. He's a fighter. He's willing to fight. So I think Andrew Booth and Brandon Ayuk, the fact that they play opposite each other, that they're likely to line up against each other, 100% makes this, I think, the most likely practice altercation.
Do you see the video of the Panthers and Patriots today?
So people keep on sending me the tweet, and I just like for whatever reason I'm always distracted by this. So I haven't actually watched the video yet.
It's an impressive one. Apparently, it was started by Mac Jones of all people.
Get out.
Trash talking.
Mac Jones?
Yeah, the quarterback.
Who? Mac Jones. Sorry. I'm sorry.
It's like I was trying to just figure out if you were going to do that or if you were going to do the if you were referring to him being as generic as Anne from Arrested Development.
Egg?
Egg? Who? Oh, that.
If you're going to call it pop-up, you're not mature to have it yet.
Yeah. True story. Let's go to Ed Donatello, who asks, why were our special teams so bad?
The penalties. Like I don't know like what like Matt Daniels is, I believe, a first-time coordinator because he was an assistant coordinator under Fossil. But yeah, I mean, it just seemed like the penalties. I don't know if that's something that could be cleaned up. I don't know if that's something that's endemic to the team, but that was like primarily the issue. I know that Mike Zimmer wrote something over at 33rd Team about how bad the special team kickoff coverage was across the league, which is just so funny. But I guess if that's like if you're traumatized by your own special teams unit, you'll pay attention when the rest of the league is also not doing so hot there. But yeah, I don't think it was like, anything like design related to how the special teams unit was like tasked with, hey, the L1 has to do this as opposed to that. I think it was just like, Dan Chisena doesn't know how to tackle. So, that's always been true.
And be like, maybe he shouldn't be in a position to do that.
But he gets there first. He just doesn't do anything with that fact.
Yeah. PMH asks, what can you tell me that will make me care about the preseason?
I've kidnapped your child.
No. We talked about this earlier.
Okay, but that like 100% answers the question,
yeah,
right?
but we're not kidnapping children on this show.
All right, I've kidnapped your wife.
We're not
What, felonies, you said children? What, we changing the rules?
Mid-season, yes, it turns out. Welcome to the Hell League. All felonies aside, what can you tell them to make them care about the preseason?
What do we show about misdemeanors?
We're doing better than you'd think.
All right. I mean, it depends on the type of fan you are. If you want like hyper specific coverage of individual players, which like, I mean, you're listening to this podcast, so like I would assume that's like a thing that you're into. I feel like you could watch the preseason game, turn it off halfway through if you don't want to like learn about guys that are more likely than not gonna not make the team. Although the reason I like to watch all the way through the end of each preseason game, aside from the fact that it's my job, before it became my job, I would watch all the way to the end of preseason games, is because you could find guys like Adam Thielen and have the stupidest arguments about them and then think that you're right like 3 years later, right? Like, I think that that's fun, is that like you find it like you find a guy that's like, gosh, who was the Titans fullback that they grabbed from the Vikings from Vanderbilt, who's a super athlete? He's not on the roster
Blasingame.
Yeah, Kari Blasingame, right? You watch him be a fullback, and you watch Kari Blasingame be a fullback at the end of a preseason game, and you see him like outrun a dude to the edge as a fullback, right? And you're like, wow, that guy has something. And you find him on a roster, a year later. And I think it's just there's like something rewarding about that, about like seeing somebody pop in the preseason and then 2 years later. So I understand that this is like a time investment, that it's not going to pay off immediately. And then 2 years later, you see him like show up and you're like, I called it. And you might not have called it. You might have just said, I remember that guy being really good. But who's going to disagree with you, right? You called it. That's what you can take credit for it. I think that's fun. I think it's really fun to see guys, live out their dreams and be these long shots that, they're either like on their last chance, like somebody like a Tom Johnson, right? Somebody on the last chance that finally gets to make the roster, becomes like a starter, makes a good living for himself. Somebody that, it's like a tryout guy, like an Adam Thielen or a Marcus Sherrills, right? And just barely makes the 90-man roster through tryouts, and then just barely makes the practice squad, and then just barely makes the team, and is now like an established part of the team. That's so cool, man. So I don't know. I that's like the thing I like about the preseason. But if you just kind of want to know like what the team is going to look like, the preseason is not going to be that fantastic for you, but you could still get a sense of like how the Vikings need to operate, how quickly that offense is going, right? Like, we're so used to the Vikings lining up. And I guess this answers the first question we got in the mail, like lining up and just draining that clock before snapping the ball. It's just something that they do. They had the fewest drives per game, or the second or third fewest drives per game for so many seasons in a row. They just let that clock drain and then they go. And now we're seeing kind of something different. They're modifying what the tempo is, or changing what they're doing. They're lining up with more receivers on the field. It's just, you get a preview of kind of what the Vikings will look like, and you kind of get an idea of why they're doing those things, or what it's going to look like, or what the next play is going to be based off the stuff that you saw in the preseason. So I think it's cool. I just like, don't attach yourself to the idea that the result matters, right? Like, I barely remember that the Vikings lost the preseason game. In fact, I had to look it up when I was writing my player recap. So did they lose? Yeah, I guess.
The preseason isn't about winning and losing. It's about the friends you make along the way.
Right. I think.
Sure. Nasby asks, what's the difference between Brian Asamoah and Eric Wilson as players?
Eric Wilson was like a converted safety to linebacker at Cincinnati. That was his path to the NFL. And he played like he was a really great coverage player and just a god-awful run defender, right? They both might be undersized athletes, and you might think that they're both kind of coverage guys. But Ryan Asamoah was actually not that great in coverage in college. He was a much better run defender. The fact that he's undersized makes you think that maybe he's going to be a coverage guy. But really, he did a great job of kind of sorting through the trash, finding the running back amidst all of the mess, and taking him down behind the line of scrimmage. That's kind of a difficult skill to translate when you don't have the physical skill set typically associated with that. But, it's possible that he does that, and he's going to try and develop as a coverage player. That's possible. Eric Kendricks developed as a run defender, right? He did the opposite. It was really good. And in some sense, Jordan Hicks kind of did that too. So it is possible to add that skill set. But Asamoah and Eric Wilson are entering the NFL as different profile players. And I think that, especially, Asamoah's like playing at Oklahoma, the Big 12, it's playing at a bit of a higher level than was Cincinnati, the American Conference. Let's just say that. I think that comparison, I understand where it comes from, but I don't think that they're very close as players at all.
All right, next question is going to be from Joshua, who asks, is Ed Ingram really ready to be a viable starter? Looks like he graded out well in week 1, but then again, so did Wyatt Davis last year against the Broncos. Also, do you have any concerns about his transition to the mid-zone scheme, or has he proven himself to be mobile enough?
I mean, like if the Vikings had to start, like if this weekend, right, if they had a game on, let's say, like Saturday or Sunday, I suppose, and it counted, right? If they were like, oh, well, we got to play our starters, this game counts. Hopefully Kirk tests negative. We need to put together our starters, and they have to play a whole game. I would put Ed Ingram in at starter. He hasn't proven anything yet, right? Like, he went up against a third string defensive tackle and dominated him. Good job, dude. That doesn't tell us he's going to be a good guard, but Jesse Davis has told us he's probably not going to be a good guard. And in the spirit of the unknown contains the possibility of something better as well as something worse. And the median outcome for like a rookie second round pick, I guess technically he's like a second round pick. Maybe he's a third. He was picked at 66. So I guess he's a third round pick. But in the spirit of like a guy picked in the late 60s, right? And what those rookies look like at guard, the likely outcome is better than what we kind of saw from Jesse Davis based off of his history of playing what we saw in the preseason. So I think you're more likely going to get a good player based off of, even though his performance doesn't necessarily one-to-one translate given the skill level of the players he is up against, a good player is likely to play well against those fourth string defensive tackles. A bad player has some probability of playing well and some probability of playing poorly against those fourth string defensive tackles. And we know that Jesse Davis is not a good player. So there's that you're just more likely to get a good player out of that. So I would say that you'd start him. That doesn't tell me he's ready to be a viable starter. In fact, those first couple of practices in camp, that first week and a half of camp, I thought was really worrisome from that perspective. But I thought that, he really did look like a player that, I don't know if trust is the right word, but that you would, invest more time in kind of investigating that. Also, Wyatt Davis last year against the Broncos, I do not remember that with the level of specificity that you do, but luckily I have a cheat sheet in PFF and I'm just going to use them to substitute my opinion. So let's see.
As you're looking that up, I remember that game, and it was not that was easily one of the uglier Vikings preseason games that I've ever seen. It was not good.
So Wyatt Davis was the second graded lineman out of all Vikings linemen against the Denver Broncos in week 1 of the preseason last year. Ed Ingram was the second graded lineman of all the Vikings linemen in week 1 of the preseason this year. Wyatt Davis still got a poor grade as a pass blocker with 2 hurries allowed, and got all of his grade mostly from run blocking, which I will admit, I believe is also kind of the case, as it were, for Ed Ingram. I don't remember what his grade was. I just remember being impressed by like watching him, right? Because that's these spreadsheets. I don't know anything about football. No, Ed Ingram graded up well in both run blocking and pass protection, so that's good. Yeah, I mean that's always like a thing that you have to be aware of, is that sometimes these players do very well in the preseason and they're just not fit to play. I'm going to take a look at some of the top graded preseason players overall at the offensive line and see what I come up with. So the top graded offensive linemen in the preseason include some players that were pretty good, like Taylor Lewan and Royce Newman for Green Bay, and also some players that you didn't get the world's greatest performance of when the regular season happened. Will Hernandez, LaRaven Clark. I think Kevin Dotson from the Steelers was also unimpressive. Let me take a look at how he ended up grading out in the regular season in 2021. Yeah, he was also unimpressive. But you're more likely, if you're a good player, you're more than likely to have good preseason performances than you are bad ones, right? Because, the top of this list is generally populated with good players, as well as players I've never heard of. Derval Queiroz-Nato, the Miami guard. Yeah, well, good for him. Good preseason for this guy I've never heard of.
Let's go to Professor Poop, who asks, we're going to talk a lot here about preseason performers who made a name for themselves. Which players were considered rosterable that have had such a poopy preseason performance that may make them not make the team?
Well, I guess I don't know if people considered Wyatt Davis rosterable, but that discussion kind of comes to mind. Let's see. I guess Chris Boyd is the opposite. I guess he was considered unrosterable, and then he had a pretty good performance. But of the rosterable players that you now have some questions about, Sean Mannion, I guess he didn't light the world on fire. Kyle Hinton a little bit. Oli Udoh is probably the best example. I thought he played really poorly, and I think we were just kind of all slotting him into our 53-man rosters as, now that he's a tackle, he's going to be kind of useful again. But that performance was pretty alarming from him. So from a rosterable player perspective, that was an issue. I never kind of put Chaz Surratt in my 53-man rosters, or I think I did in one of them, but I generally just didn't. And he played so poorly that it's just like, yeah, he's going to cut him now. Andre Mintz, I guess he already got cut, so you can throw that onto the list. And yeah, I think that answers it. We already covered some of the other poor performers, so I think that covers it.
Yeah. Cody asks, after watching and analyzing the first preseason game, who do you think has a better chance of making the Week 1 roster? Jonathan Bullard or T.Y. McGill?
I think T.Y. McGill. I think Bullard does offer a lot. I've been impressed with him as a pass rusher, but I think McGill just offers more for a couple of reasons. First, I think is that he's more dual capable. He could do both run defense and pass rush, even though he's not as good at pass rush as Jonathan Bullard by a pretty reasonable stretch. But on top of that, I think that there's just more available at defensive end for the Vikings. So I think that, Harrison Phillips is your nose tackle, and your backup nose tackles, probably your other starters, probably Dalvin Tomlinson. You don't really have a backup nose tackle, right, for the Vikings. All of these other guys that they have, like Jalen Twyman, Armon Watts, all of these other guys are essentially defensive end in this scheme that are like three techniques, right? So there's no defensive tackles, right? You can always have somebody who's got some capacity for rushing the passer. James Lynch, right? The fifth round pick, Odomewo. Like, all of these guys are pass rushers or three techniques or five techniques or whatever you want to call them. McGill is a nose tackle, and there's just not many of those. So I'd say probably McGill.
Next question is going to be from Tank B, who asks, for a Reeves Wild Takes Corner, with one preseason game down and marked as a loss, give me your wildest, way too early hot take for the season.
My wildest, way too early hot take for the season. Well, I think trucks should stay unburned.
Yep, his truck in particular looked like it should not have been on fire today.
Yeah, so that's my hot take, is that it should not have been on fire. No, I mean, condolences. I'm really sorry that happened to you, man. That looks really rough. I was complaining about my car repair troubles, and then I go into the Discord and I see that. I'm like, well, what's the one Vikings motto? It could always get worse. So
yeah,
that sucks. But in terms of preseason takes, my wildest, way too early hot take for the season, the Vikings have a good secondary.
Wow, that woof. E.T. Spaceman asks, are there any examples of QBs that made decisions as slowly as Mon does today, fixed them, and became a success story?
Yeah, I think all of the examples that I could come up with off the top of my head, none of them turned out to be quick processors. Maybe quick. None of them turned out to be guys that led the league in shortest time to throw, but they did all quicken up their process pretty significantly. So if you take a look, and the names that came to mind, because these are the successes. So I'm not comparing Kellen Mond to them. I'm just saying it is possible. Players like Russell Wilson, Alex Smith, Cam Newton, all of them led the league in various capacities in time to throw when they were first playing 2012, 2013 for Russell Wilson, 2005, 2006 for Alex Smith. I don't think we even have time to throw statistics for him, but I knew it took him. I remember it taking him a long time at San Francisco. Cam Newton was it Christian Ponder year, right? So that's 2011, 2012. They were all leading the league in their respective categories in time to throw, and none of them became the fastest in the NFL at it, or even faster than average, but they quickened up the process and they were able to kind of balance those two out. They become pretty high-level players, at least for a short period of time. The best example might be Aaron Rodgers. Now, he still leads the league in some elements of time to throw. I don't think he is 100% the time to throw leader. It's always somebody like Lamar Jackson. But Aaron Rodgers always holds onto the ball a lot longer than a lot of other elite quarterbacks. But, I mean, you take a look at what he was doing in 2009, 2010, he was still a very talented quarterback, obviously. But he would take too many sacks, or he would invite too much pressure, get hit a little bit too often. Now he does a much better job of managing what that looks like and making decisions before that becomes kind of a danger to his physical security and a danger to his sack rate, right? So it is possible to quicken up your process, but at some level, you're not going to be able to. I guess Ben Roethlisberger did it, but generally speaking, you're not going to be able to become kind of the league's quickest thrower, right? You're mostly just going to be a guy that makes it not a liability. Okay, yeah, 2009, Aaron Rodgers' sack rate was 8.5%. Even in 2012, it was up to 8.5%. but it doesn't for a full season. It never hits 8% again. He did hit 8.5% in a half season since then, but he's generally kept it below 7%. So that holding onto the ball too long and taking those sacks did kind of get mitigated by making sure that when he did hold onto the ball, it was kind of worth it. He would throw deep passes and not throw that many interceptions. And also, he just kind of reduced the amount of times it turned out he would go down to the ground with the ball in his hands.
Next question is going to be from Alex, who asks, is there a single free agent available who is worth more to the team than saving the cap space for next season?
Linval.
Linval's hungry.
Linval hungry. Yeah, I mean, I talked about how the Vikings don't have a nose tackle backup. I don't know if Linval would want to sign up just to be a backup. So, that's always a consideration. But as much as I like what T.Y. McGill has done, as much as I really like what the undrafted kid, Julian Taylor, it's Linval. I think he's not going to cost too much. I think that'd be worth it. You don't have to roll over the cap space. You can just grab Linval. That's probably kind of like oh no, there's been a catastrophe midway through the season. We need a starting nose tackle stat. Linval is available more than it is like a camp signing. But I am concerned about the defensive end depth. The interior defensive line non-nose tackles. That could be Sheldon Richardson, right? If we want to venture out of former Vikings, if we are really concerned about the nature of the cornerback group, you could sign Janoris Jenkins, now known as Jackrabbit Jenkins. I thought that his season last year was actually fine. He's not on a team right now. If we're really concerned about the backup quarterback thing, I don't know how you could lure Ryan Fitzpatrick, but if you could, why not? I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like he's better than Kellen Mond and Sean Mannion, right? So Ryan Fitzpatrick, maybe, was he like 40 now? I mean, that sounds like the life. And if Irv Smith takes way too long to recover from his thumb surgery, Jared Cook, I mean, he's already familiar with the style of offense. He's still got a decent amount of athleticism left, despite being like 35. And he's become a better blocker over the years. So, that's a possibility.
All right, next question is also from Alex. The question is, would the NFL season be more entertaining overall if a playoff team was added and the AFC West was guaranteed 4 playoff spots, but they only play each other all season? Has there ever been a more competitive division than what is being projected for the AFC West this year?
So, I get the nature of this question, given, I was stacked those quarterbacks are with Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson, and I guess Derek Carr. If Derek Carr is the worst quarterback in a division, that is a stacked division, right? Which I think I tweeted that out a couple of months ago, and some Raiders fans were like, Derek Carr's not the worst quarterback in the division. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man.
Really? Let's just scale it back.
Yeah, just relax. When they win the division, come at me. But until then, just
something has to give in that division. Someone's going to end up with 5 or 6 wins and a lot of soul searching to do.
Right? Yeah.
Denver.
Yeah, it's Denver. It might be Denver. So first of all, that sounds like a great idea because all these teams are really fun. I mean, especially because you think about it hey, the Chiefs might get back to bully ball, but they still have Patrick Mahomes. Justin Herbert is still kind of developing. And he was really great in the clutch. I mean, his 4th down percentage was absolutely nuts. Russell Wilson's got a really great receiver cast to work with, and a non-porous offensive line probably. So that'll be kind of fun. And the Raiders actually looked really compelling over the past couple of years. And you really like, Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow. Now they've added Devontae Adams, right? There is a lot of kind of sparks there to work with. So I get it. But after week 8, you would 100% get bored of them playing each other all the time. You would hate it. Plus, there's no stakes. They all make the playoffs? No, that's no fun, right? I would like it if you can construct a scenario where all 4 make the playoffs, right? Because with 7 playoff teams in the AFC, you get your 4 seeds and you get your 3 others. So you could, in theory, do it. It's probably not going to happen, but that sounds way cooler if they do it in the current system than if they do it in a new system where you guarantee them this playoff spots.
Yeah, it would require basically for every one of the teams
to go undefeated out of division.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
It's possible.
And they would have to beat each other. They would have to like trade off wins and losses. They would have to beat each other up a lot in division.
Ben DiNucci would be very busy making all things possible there. So
right.
I'm not sure on that. Andrew Shuba asks, who has more trade value, Wyatt Davis or Garrett Bradbury?
Jesus. Probably Garrett Bradbury. I mean, Garrett Bradbury has starts. Like I understand the genesis of the question, but they're not on the same plane at all. Bradbury is a very good reach blocker, right? And a very good second level missile, right? He's really good in the screen. Like there's stuff that he is absolutely good at. That other stuff's a liability enough that, you kind of want to get rid of him. But like that's there. Wyatt Davis, I don't think we've got like a thing that he's good at that you could develop your offense around. So Garrett Bradbury definitely has more trade value. Well, I mean, Wyatt Davis is going to get cut. What trade value does he have? Every team knows he's going to get cut.
Euleron asks, who is the Machine Gun Kelly of the first preseason game for the Vikings? I will not be elaborating.
Good Lord.
I'm not sure I want to know, although the person who was opening for Machine Gun Kelly this tour is Melissa, also known as Avril Lavigne.
Oh, Jesus.
Because
I can't escape.
That is the reality in which we live.
I can't escape. Melissa. Okay. The answer is Machine Gun Kellen Mond.
Ouch.
I will not be elaborating.
You will not be elaborating. Let's also go to Euleron, who asks, what is the most scandalous yet still plausible in-season story you can imagine happening to the Vikings this year? Mine is that a string of leaked texts will reveal that not only did Kirk attend a COVID party to purposefully gain natural immunity before the season started, but that tactic was endorsed and even encouraged by new head coach Kevin O'Connell.
The phrase "yet still plausible" I feels like a constraint, but it's not, right? There's so many things the Vikings could do that you would believe. Like we went to training camp and found out the first day of training camp that a coach had like died, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that can happen to the Vikings where you're just like, yeah, man, I guess.
For newer listeners, this was a couple of years ago, not this year.
It was not this year. Holy shit. Yeah, no, it was not this year. It was Tony Sperano. I don't want to be flippant about it. Like people were very heartfelt about it. It was very sudden. But like it was just like, man, what else could happen to this team? One of the coaches refused to get vaccinated. This was last year. One of the coaches refused to get vaccinated, so they just had to promote another offensive line coach had to promote an offensive line coach, and that was just like the solution, I guess. And the guy who refused to get the vaccine would just like Zoom into meetings, I guess. I don't know. Or I guess, I don't know. The NFL is sponsored by Microsoft, so that he would Teams into meetings, I guess. That's a much worse verb.
Much.
But yeah, I don't know. I like everyone remembers. I shouldn't say remembers because some of you probably don't. But like everyone is aware of like 2005, the season, right? Like just kind of generally, like we found out that the Vikings had a party boat with an orgy in it. Like what do you mean? Yet still plausible? All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci and in Vikings misfortune, right? Yeah. Like yet still plausible. What's the most scandalous? Like the Brett Favre like texting story broke I shouldn't say broke, but gained steam while he was a Vikings quarterback, even though it occurred I believe it was while he was with the Jets.
Correct.
Like, come on. They 2010, they trade for Randy Moss. He throws a pass to Brett Favre, an illegal pass, and then gets cut like 1 week later and ends up on the Titans. Do you remember Randy Moss on the Titans? What do you mean yet still plausible? And he got cut in part because he insulted the catering by comparing it to dog food. What my brain does not have the capacity to imagine the most scandalous, plausible in-season story for the Vikings.
I like the idea that Kirk Cousins decides to go out and get a face tattoo and gets an infection from it, which then causes the vision in his eye to go bad.
I like the idea that all of that is true, but the vision in his eye becomes good.
somehow the evil inside of him it turns into the egg salad sandwich from Futurama that Fry eats.
Yes.
That's where we're at. All right, you know what? Sure. Kenneth Allen asks, what do analytics people think about Tucker's new contract? Obviously, he's the best kicker in the league and probably in history, but are kickers worth big contracts? From an analytics perspective, is it worth paying twice as best for the best kicker? Hashtag don't pay kickers.
Okay, so when I got this question, I tried looking at Twitter for takes on this, and I was like, well, if I search Justin Tucker, I'm not going to get as many takes because a lot of people on Twitter will only use like the last name. Everyone knows which kicker they're talking about. But based off of the people I follow, if I just type in Tucker, I'm going to get a bunch of Tucker Carlson, which I'm not going to explain what side of the spectrum most of my timeline is on. I'm sure you all can make guesses, but I'm not going to say explicitly, how people react to Tucker Carlson on my Twitter timeline, but it would not be helpful for adjudicating this question about Justin Tucker. Luckily, Timo Risk, otherwise known as @PFF_Moo, did tweet about Justin Tucker, full name. So I could find his tweet and his reaction to the signing, which I believe is like $6 million a year, 4 years, $24 million total, $17.5 million guaranteed. His reaction to the signing is Justin Tucker is the only underpaid kicker in the NFL, which is a pretty strong statement, I think. So I'm going to link his story about assessing the true value of NFL kickers. It is wild. So I don't know if most of the listeners are aware of the concept of error bars on a chart, but the idea is on a chart, you can have what's sometimes called a box and whiskers plot, or you can just have error bars where you've got your average expected outcome, right? So that's the dot in the middle in the case of this chart that I'm going to link in the show notes. And then you've got these two lines that extend out from either side of the dot, and those lines have stops, right? Where the lines now go vertical, right? And so where those lines end is kind of the range of outcomes you could reasonably expect that kicker to be in. So which is kind of, generally speaking, like a 95% of outcomes all fall within inside the error bars, right? And the most likely outcome is in the middle, which is the big dot. That's kind of what we know that kicker's value to be within that range. Now, because kickers have such a small sample size, even if you have 3 or 2 seasons of data on a kicker, the error bars are going to be very wide. And so how a kicker performs one season does not give us very much indication how they'll do on the next season. And so it's the case that the second best kicker in the data set, which at the time you constructed the data set was Harrison Butker, his mean outcome, his average outcome, was still within the error bar for the lowest ranked kicker. So it was possible for the lowest ranked kicker to be better than the most likely outcome. And, it's not like that's the most likely scenario, but it's possible for the worst kicker on that graph, one of his potential outcomes to still be better than the most likely outcome of the second best kicker. Justin Tucker, the best kicker, his low end error bar does not intersect with anybody's high end error bar, or it might intersect with one. It might intersect with Harrison Butker's. Like the worst possible scenario for Justin Tucker, if he continues playing at the level that he's playing at, but all of his luck runs out, basically, is still better than the best possible outcome that like Harrison Butker could put together. It is inarguable that he is the best kicker we've ever seen to me. Like to me, it's inarguable. The reason that you don't pay kickers is because you don't know their worth, and they could be anywhere inside that error bar. That is not the case for Justin Tucker. And that certainty, combined with his level of play being so high, gives you a reason to pay him that much. So at least one analytics person made an extremely strong, well-backed case for why Justin Tucker is worth even more than what the Ravens offered him.
Next question is from Kevin O'Quigley, who asks, I subscribe to NFL Plus. You poor soul.
I'm sorry.
Mostly so I can rewatch painful Vikings memories.
I'm sorry?
I tried to watch the final Favre play at TCF Bank, but found that the play was cut out of the NFL replay. It goes from a meager second down run by Toby Gerhart. I was waiting for the I'm sorry again.
I'm sorry.
To a fourth down punt.
I'm sorry?
Question. Should I follow the NFL's lead and also go full Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
So I think the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a very good movie. I recommend that people watch it. I will say, overrated, but it's a good movie nevertheless, right? Like, it can be overrated and good. But one of the things that happens in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, spoilers, I guess, if you haven't seen it, one of the messages that comes across, at least to me, maybe my reading of it is wrong, is that the two characters who end up, and again, spoilers, so, skip ahead, the two characters that end up erasing their memories in Eternal Sunshine, which is why it's called Spotless Mind, right? It's like the happiness that you get from erasing bad or even traumatic memories. The two characters that erase their memories specifically to get away from the bad memories of the relationship they have with each other meet up again and start a new relationship. It's kind of this like eternal recurrence thing. It's kind of this like fate thing. You're always going to come back to it. I think that's probably true for watching the Vikings, right? Like if you erased your memory of all the bad things the Vikings did and you began to watch the Vikings again, would you feel better about the successes that they would build? Yeah. Would you feel more hope and excitement about their push towards the playoffs? Would you feel, like an actual sense of tension as they enter week 17 and 18 with, it all on the line and their ability to make the playoffs? Yeah, absolutely. You'd feel great once they make the playoffs in a way that somebody who remembers the Vikings doesn't, right? Would you feel worse when they screw it up? Yeah. Are you kidding me? Like, I genuinely thought that Blair Walsh made that kick against the Seattle Seahawks, given my angle. I've told the story a couple of times on the podcast by now. I genuinely thought that Blair Walsh made that kick because of the angle I was watching at TCF Bank. And when I found out that it turned out he actually, and my whole section did too, when I found out that he had actually missed that kick, I didn't know it at the time, but I should have been thankful for all of the times the Vikings have pulled out the rug from underneath me, right? Because that had unconsciously or subconsciously, or however you want to put it, had in the background of my consciousness, prepared me to just think, well, yeah, of course that happened.
Why
it guarded
me. Why wouldn't it?
Right, why wouldn't it? He made the kick and he missed it. Like, what's more Vikings than a kicker making a game-winning field goal kick, but actually missing it? Like that's even more Vikings than missing it outright, right? That's more Vikings than a guy who hasn't missed a single kick in for the entirety of the season, lining up for a chip shot field goal and missing it, right? Making it then missing it. Wow, I can't believe you even found a way to bend the rules of reality to do it. But the Vikings did it, at least for me and everybody in my section, right? And so I think that the pain will hurt worse if you do it, because your fate, if you're going to continue being a Vikings fan after this experiment, your fate is going to be tied to a team that's going to do that to you again, and you're not going to have the emotional insurance that you need in order to sustain it. Plus, let's say the Vikings don't do that. Let's say in this weird other world, right, the Vikings actually win the Super Bowl. You'll be extraordinarily happy, don't get me wrong. But the guys that have to put, like, that, are used to having the rug pulled out from under them, the people that have to put the rug back underneath them, they're even more happy. It's so surreal. I think that sustaining those losses makes those wins all the better. I guess it's kind of Taoist. But, like, that, I think, would make those wins taste so much better. So I don't think you should go full Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I think you should search out these plays. Like, geez, I go to therapy instead. But I don't think that you should erase them from your memory.
Boy, I was about to make a comment about this is why justice is insufferable, but justice is just insufferable regardless.
No, he would always be insufferable. I mean, he's also an Oregon fan. What have they done?
Yeah, that. Zen Cupid asks, we all know this tweet from Diggs. Earlier today, Stephon Diggs tweeted that Minnesota has the best state fair in the country, and it's not even close. We all know this tweet from Diggs isn't just about a fair and must be about his displeasure in Buffalo, and he's pining for his days in Minnesota. After all, there's truth to the rumors that I may or may not have
rumors. Yeah.
that I may or may not have just started. For Arif's cryptic receiver's corner, what clues within this tweet will point us to what he actually means?
All right, let me pull it because I did retweet it. Let me see. No lie, comma, Minnesota has the best fair in the world, LOL, no debate. So I think the first phrase, no lie, tells us a lot right there, right? Because it speaks to this question of, falsity and truth. When's the last time we heard Diggs talk about truth? Well, when he said there's truth to all rumors. And that preceded him being traded. So I think no lie is probably a reference to the questions of truth, but now it goes the other way around, right? It's a reversal. Before he's talking about truth, now he's talking about lies. It's a flip of the coin. What's a reversal of him being traded away from the Vikings? Being traded to the Vikings. So that's number one, right? Now, fair. The concept of fairness has been heavily debated by philosophers over the years, right? But I think in one sense, a lot of people equate it with a sense of justice. I think what would be more poetic, what would be more just than Stephon Diggs, the hero of the Minneapolis Miracle, coming back and finishing the job? That sounds fair to me, right? So I think that, there's something there too, right? I think the LOL, if you just line up the lowercase L, the lowercase O, the lowercase L, that looks like a guy cheering. It's a guy raising his hands up, maybe a touchdown sign. I think that's a sign that, remember the touchdown he scored against the New Orleans Saints. How could you forget? He threw his helmet up in the air. Looked kind of like the guy for a second. So I think that's there. And then no debate. I mean, I talk about my debate career all the time on the podcast and on Twitter. I mean, that's clearly a reference to me specifically. He's talking about returning to Minnesota so that he can invoke this concept of the debater now finally being shut up by the Minnesota Vikings winning the Super Bowl. So there's a lot of clues in this tweet.
Before the internet, in order to get this sort of deep analysis, you had to go to a meeting on the docks. So we should all.
I thought you were going to say you'd have to call into a psychic.
No. This is clear meeting on the docks, like guy in a long coat smoking a cigarette. Listen, Diggs is coming.
Tell your friends.
Also, let me tell you my theory about JFK. Let's just get this out.
Yeah, well, I've got you here.
Exactly. Let's wrap this up. Arif, you seem to be very busy with all of your appearances, both on radio and in writing. What do you have to plug?
I was on Paul Allen earlier this morning. We're recording this on a Tuesday, 9 to noon. So you can probably find that through like the iHeartRadio apps ? One app?
And
I don't know.
The iHeart radio stuff and through the website. Yeah, you can Google Paul Allen's show and find it pretty easily.
Yeah. See, thanks, James. I also did a roundup of all the first round rookies, how they've done in camp and the preseason thus far. It has not made people happy, so I'd love if you would read that and also get mad at me. I've got coming up a piece that kind of evaluates kind of the bubble players for the Vikings. I also am now a regular on the Minnesota Football Party with Luke, and Sam. If I have my way, we'll reduce one of the Lukes through the attrition of mortality. And I've been on some various podcasts. I was just on the Draft Sharks podcast. We recorded actually half an hour before this show. And I had a lot of fun there. So check all those out.
All right, that's me it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. And we'll be back next week to talk about what happened against the 49ers. So, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at norsecodepodcast or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/norsecode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/norsecode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.